Hello and welcome to The Debate, a brand new show brought to you by P20 World. I'm your host, Sana Maqbool. And before I talk about what this show brings to you in terms of what we're going to be talking about, let me also talk about why the show was started in the first place. It is called The Debate, so of course there will be debate on the show. But what sort of a debate there will be, what issues we're going to discuss, whether or not we're going to bring in all the different views to you is what we want to be able to outline from the beginning so that you know what it is that is in store for you. So the debate, of course, is going to be a program that is going to take a look at the top stories of what is going on in the world and also in Pakistan. We're going to bring you a more holistic picture of the different issues that are going around so that you not only have a certain knowledge of what is going on, but also have an idea of the different ways that people can look at the same issue. So, of course, keeping that in mind, we want to be able to bring to you different viewpoints, different perspectives, and different opinions. And for that, we have with us experts in our studios who are going to take a look at the different angles that a story can have, and so that you are able to form an informed opinion regarding the issue, and so that we can also fulfill our responsibility of building a narrative that is also objective, while at the same time keeping in line with the amount of knowledge that you deserve to know on any related topic. Of course, this show will include two permanent analysts, and I'm going to start off introducing who they are going to be, because of course if you want an opinion or a knowledge viewpoint regarding any subject, you would want to hear it from an expert. So first of all, we have with us somebody you've already seen on at P20 around the same time, but now you'll be seeing him in a more apt role as an analyst, because that is who he is. He's a columnist, a career journalist, also an analyst with over 25 years of experience. He has an opinion on almost everything on earth, and he has been part of P20 for the past 7 years. I welcome Mr. Farrukh Pitafi to the debate.
Thank you very much.
And along with Mr. Farrukh Pitafi, we'll also be joined by another regular of our show, Mr. Raja Faisal, who's a journalist and analyst. He's a geopolitical analyst, and he has been working in the fields of the eastern and western borders of Pakistan, focusing on Pakistan's foreign policy, defense policy. He's also been associated with a think tank for the past couple of years, and he's also a columnist for a Turkey-based page called Politics Today. He will also be a permanent analyst of the show. Thank you, Mr. Faisal, for being with us.
Thank you very much, Sana.
Well, these are the three people that you're going to be seeing on the show, The Debate, which is going to air at 9 p.m. from Monday to Friday. And in this particular show, we will be taking a look at the top stories that I'm going to outline for you in the beginning. So for today's show, what we have in store for you is, of course, the government and the TLP reaching an agreement. We've seen that the country did come to a sort of a standstill for the past 2 weeks, where we've seen the clashes that have been on the streets, which resulted in at least the death of 7 policemen, and scores of other people got injured. This is not the first time that such a protest took place, not the first time such a negotiation took place, and we're going to see what sort of repercussions this has. What did the government have in mind when it decided to actually engage with the TLP, and what sort of a future is in line with how we're going to take a look at this organization in the future. The details of the negotiation, of course, are not out as yet, but we will still be able to speculate as to what could possibly have been part of the discussion. We're also going to be talking about the Sikh Referendum in the UK, which started on the 31st of October, also a befitting date considering back in 1984. This is when a lot of Sikhs were killed as part of anti-Sikh rights after the assassination of Indira Gandhi. And of course, this referendum that has been started in the UK is expected to go about in other countries as well, with the aim, of course, of having a separate Khalistan for the Sikh community in India, something that they've been working towards for a long time now. And what remains to be seen is, of course, whether this non-binding referendum is actually going to translate into a more tangible step for the Sikhs to actually gain the sort of freedom and respect that they have been striving for a long time now. And lastly, we'll also be looking at the World Cup, the T20 World Cup, which of course is something that the entire Pakistani nation, in fact the entire world, is eagerly looking at and waiting the results of. And and a sport, of course, which runs in our blood, something that we cannot stop watching. And of course, the same goes for our neighboring country as well. We've seen similar responses of the nation from Pakistan. In the previous years as well. People do take it a bit far when they're criticizing their team, or they're mocking them, or coming up with the meme humor. But of course, when they take up a notch, then it's not all that funny anymore. And so we're going to be talking about how that needs to be curtailed, what sort of a line needs to be drawn, and of course a little bit about which team are we supporting and how happy we are about India's loss at the end of the day. Now, let's begin with the first topic, which is of course the government and TLP reaching an agreement, and a very, very serious matter, of course, for the entire nation, considering this is something we've witnessed many times before now. So starting off with you, Faisal, considering, of course, the fact that this is not the first time we've seen them coming out on the streets, and we've seen the government respond in various matters. We've seen them also calling this a band or outfit. This is, of course, part of a militant group that they've claimed that the organization has. But, of course, and we see that at the end of the day, the objective of the government is to make sure that everybody is able to live a more peaceful life. We don't have any loss of life. We're making sure that the citizens of the country are able to live their life peacefully. And so, of course, negotiations seem to be the only way forward. But at what cost do you think this would have been achieved?
Sana, I think that's how it should be. Sense must prevail and aggression should be shunned. In recent days, especially 2 weeks, what we saw that on ground situations were created, bad situations were created within the interior Punjab province. But at the end, I think it was very mature of the government to deal with the problems on the table, and that's how it should be. We saw in the past that same party in the past, they were dealt by the previous government very badly, and then we had another precedent which was set in the model town Lahore by the previous government, and that too was something shouldn't have happened, and so many people lost their lives in them. Problems that were created at that time. I'm talking about Tahirul Qadri's party at that time. But this time it was very mature of the government to sit with the TLP, and they sit with the leadership, and they sit with the ulama that mattered the most in the TLP ranks. And I think at the same time we must hail Chief of Army Staff as well, because when Maulana Farrukh was asked about who played the role, and he did mention that Chief of Army Staff, he played 1000% role in this, and Chief of Army Staff wanted peace and wanted a normalization of the situation on the ground. One thing I must say, meanwhile all of these things were taking place in Pakistan, our enemy on the eastern border was very happy, as we saw on the Indian media, that things were getting exaggerated. The situation was not as bad as it was being portrayed from their side. Moreover, the Twitter and the Facebook, they were trying to highlight it very negatively, and the numbers of people they were showing in there and the fake news they were showing about it, it was very disastrous once again from the Indian media, that they wanted this to happen, but sense prevailed once again and aggression was put aside.
Of course, Faisal, but of course, at the end of the day, we also need to look at, of course, more than the fact that the neighboring country or the other people involved in Indian agenda, which is against Pakistan, were happy or not about the situation. This is something that Pakistan has not faced for the first time, like you mentioned, and not just with this particular organization, in fact, even. And so the question is, do we have a single unified strategy in mind as to how to deal with such organizations in the future as well, or this is going to be a repetition of a protest and a negotiation? Farrukh?
Right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. First of all, let me actually tackle two things that was said. One, Indian media, or the way Indian media kept on celebrating. I don't take Indian media seriously at all anymore. These days, after Narendra Modi took over, they say there are three categories of lies: lies, bigger lies, and then Indian media. So I am not going to care about that. But regarding my own country, I'm glad that further bloodshed was averted. It is important to remember because this country has been fighting radicalism for quite some time. There are parts of the country where it was easier. For example, in Balochistan, you could isolate the miscreants from the local population, right? That was easier because the population is, it is sparsely populated province. With FATA as well, or ex-FATA for that matter, it was easier because Taliban or TTP came in a very distinct color. But when you talk about Punjab, it is very densely populated region. Secondly, when you talk about this movement, it is actually gelling into the local population. True. So if you were to use actually the state of Pakistan didn't use any violence. The policemen were carrying batons, not guns. But regardless, I cannot deny that there was loss of life, particularly policemen. 7 people were martyred, 144 policemen were injured. So this is, not a very happy moment for me. But human beings are capable of holding complicated thoughts, or for that matter, conflicting thoughts. So on one side, I feel reprieved that we didn't actually head towards further radicalization, that there could be any kind of conflict. But there are questions. There are 4 or 5 questions which are very important. And will, as time passes, we'll have to ask those questions. One, is it the end of it all, or we are going to see more of this, right? Because this is not this group's first movement towards Islamabad, it is the 6th. So there is always a possibility of a 7th or 8th or 9th, right? The second thing is, what is the short-term strategy? Is it what we saw? Because we, as you pointed out very pithily at the start, we don't know the agreement, nodal points, what exactly was agreed on. Then the third question is, what is the long-term strategy? Remember, somebody actually allowed these groups to get radicalized. So these radicalized groups, do we have any way to actually cancel it out? You pointed out that we should have some plan. So we have a national action plan, and that could have actually worked wondrously. But unfortunately, the problem with this country is that we have been through so many crises that whenever one crisis is over, we just give up and wait for another to happen. Otherwise, we could have actually implemented it. So again, long-term strategy. Then the fourth one is the morale of the force itself. Remember that the people who die, they die in service of the state and the country. And by the looks of it, people who died, their colleagues are demoralized at this moment, right? So the government and the state will have to find a way to buck them up as well. And finally, the international angle that Faisal was alluding to, although he ended up only talking about one country, this was an attempt to dictate the federal government on foreign policy. So it is important to remember that Pakistan is connected to a world. Pakistan is an important part of the Community of Nations. So how does this play out internationally? We have to keep on reminding the world that this fight that we are fighting is not merely for Pakistan's own survival, it is for the civilization. For 20 years, we have sacrificed 80,000 people. It was not merely for Pakistan, it was not merely for the region, it was for the entire world. And imagine if Pakistan was not doing it, how much violence could there be in the world? True. Didn't happen. So we are the good guys, we are the heroes, and just because of these elements, don't try to actually put us down or just tag us as problematic. We are not. We are the heroes in this story.
Of course, and that is extremely important, as you mentioned, Farrukh. And of course, the details of the agreement are yet to come out, and we will see what sort of a strategy it is that the government is actually implementing. You talked about the long-term and short-term goals, but we really need to see a sort of more of a preventative strategy for such protests and such organizations coming out and being able to cause such huge economic losses to the country, or of course hinder the lives of the people at large, and whether or not that sort of a strategy is in place, that we'll see hopefully when such a protest does not exist for the 8th time. Moving forward, of course, the Sikh referendum that happened on Sunday that started in the UK, considering, of course, that this is something that the Sikhs have been demanding for a while now. This is not a binding referendum, of course, but what the movement actually aims to achieve is that they can actually reach out to the United Nations and go for a more tangible step towards working towards this particular Khalistan movement to achieve its end. They've also earlier to this referendum released a map which includes not only Punjab but also other areas including Haryana, parts of Rajasthan, UP, as part of being Khalistan's territory. So of course, what actually comes out of this referendum and whether or not it holds the power to encourage Sikhs at large to come out, raise their morale in terms of making sure that this movement gains the kind of momentum that the Indian government is trying to curb, of course, remains to be seen. This is just the start, and we'll see whether or not this holds any real value. So, Mr. Faisal, considering that this referendum now has started on the 31st of October, do you think that this actually has hopes for moving towards something that we can see in which the lives of the Sikhs at large, both within India and outside, is going to change? They're actually going to achieve their goal. Is this a step forward, really, or this is just another sort of dead end?
I believe it is. I believe it is. Why? Because I did talk to a few of the Khalistan movement leadership. I happen to be in touch with them, being a journalist, and to me, they were jubilant. They were hopeful that this is a good start. They did mention that they wanted to do it earlier, last year, 2020 referendum they called it, but they had to postpone it just because of COVID-19. And now when they found the right time for doing it, they started it from Britain. They started it from Britain, and it won't stop here. It won't stop here. It would go to US, Canada, Australia, and they have a plan that they want to conduct this referendum in Punjab as well. And you're very right that it will have problems for India in coming future when it comes to they raising their voice in United Nations, because their ultimate goal is to take it to United Nations and take the permission from the United Nations and ask and plea United Nations to consider the referendum on the table as a legitimate demand for them, for the Sikhs. And Sikhs for Justice, they are playing a key role in it. And now we saw that a few of the politicians from Britain, they are hailing it. Especially the biggest voice is George Galloway, who has a history of standing for justice and with the Kashmiri people, with the Muslims as well throughout the world, and he is standing with the Sikhs as well. So I think it will play a key role in coming future and how the things get designed for them in Khalistan.
Right. We also saw an attempt by the Indian government to actually forestall this referendum from taking place. But of course, we've seen that many such actions in the past, not just related to the Sikh movement, but other minorities, or of course human rights violations in Kashmir and LOC violations, many actions by the Indian government point to the fact that the Indian government is not really following the international norms, or of course acting like a responsible democratic country. However, despite that, we don't really see a real change in the way countries interact with India. So at the end of the day, I'm quite skeptical whenever such an action happens, whether or not it's going to really have a damaging impact on the country. What do you think, Farrukh?
Right. When you said you're skeptical, I thought that I'm simpatico, right? I kind of share that sentiment, but where else am I simpatico? Faisal earlier was telling us that he's in contact with the Khalistan movement. I will take it a bit further when it comes to granular detail. I am in touch with all the Sikhs, as many as I know, and I am simpatico with them. Why am I saying it? Because I have always treated them as one of our own. Frankly, when you go back to the historical perspective, in 1947, because of Radcliffe Award, Punjab might have been divided, but it was essentially the one entity. It was one entity, and it was supposed to be one entity. And these are basically our own people, our own friends, our own brothers. So instead of just talking about one banner or the other, I'm going to support all the Sikhs all over the world for whatever they want, whether they want an independent state, whether they want to do something else, whatever that is, I'm going to support that. Why am I a bit skeptical? I'm skeptical because India's influence has been growing all over the world, and you have seen that these days it keeps on pushing for getting a permanent seat at the UNSC. And while it goes on, and it perhaps will not succeed, I have to also point out that compared to Khalistan, Kashmir issue, which is of course more existential to Pakistan's own identity, was something where the UNSC itself promised, and India promised, that there will be a plebiscite. 73 years later, there hasn't been any plebiscite so far, right? And India keeps on shifting its goalposts. So at this moment, what I want my country to do, what I want every country which has any contact with Sikhs, for example, Canada, Italy, other countries in Europe, they have substantial representation of Sikhs. First of all, they need to stand shoulder to shoulder with our Sikh brothers and sisters. Then also keep an open eye at what Indian government at this time tries to do, because we know that this is a Hindutva government which actually wants to do away with all kind of diversity. And in order to achieve that end result, it doesn't mind brutalizing minorities, not only Muslims, it has been brutalizing Christians. And I hope that this time when Pope met Narendra Modi, I'm hoping that he must have brought up the issue of Christians who have really been treated very badly by the Indian government so far, and the Hindutva bans. And then Sikhs are being totally being brutalized at this moment. Remember, there are two things. One is Khalistan Referendum took place. That is a separate entity. There is a very organic rights movement called Farmers Movement in India. And because it originated in Indian Punjab or Indian controlled Punjab, they have tried to confuse the two. But when it comes to Sikhs and their momentum, I think whatever they are demanding, it should be fulfilled. So if you are not calling yourself a Khalistani, you should not be tagged as one. And Indian government should not use any of these excuses to further brutalize the minorities. This is what is important.
Of course, but we've seen in many instances, of course, that shoulds and should nots don't really play a really key role in when the states actually make decisions regarding what they think is right and wrong. And but the more questionable fact over here, for me at least, remains that this is not just something that is happening at an anti-Muslim or anti-Sikh or anti-Christian front. This is something which is happening to all of these different communities, and we've seen that happen happen within India. And despite that, and despite the sort of actions that have been taken on an international front, we've seen maybe the public opinion at large within India, of course, remains something which is not really stepping up to the fact that this is something that the country should not be acting towards. How important is that opinion to be formed as well? We've seen movements culminate in different parts of the world, but how much of an action is being taking place and actually working towards the Indian public opinion? Mr. Faisal.
Sana, there are facts about India that in India the Sikh population either they are obviously relying on overseas remittances. Number two, farmers. Number three, the large number of Indian Sikhs, they are actually in the Indian army, and they are in Indian Air Force, Indian Naval Force, and they are playing key roles in there. So probably this could be one of the factors. But one very important thing I wanted to highlight earlier as well, but somehow I have forgotten, the times and dates they've chosen for this referendum, they are very important. It started on the day when Indira Gandhi was murdered by two of her Sikh guards, and in 1984. And then what we saw from 1st of November till 5th of November 1984, a massacre was raged against the Sikhs throughout India, and entirely focusing near Delhi and in the Punjab as well. And nearly around 17,000 Sikhs, they were murdered in 4 or 5 days. And I think it itself is a message from the referendum that enough is enough. And now when, as Farrukh has mentioned, rightly mentioned, that nowadays the farmers' protests, they are playing the key role. At the peak of the farmers' protests, this referendum taking place, I think it's a huge importance. Plus, we should not be forgetting a fact that today's Sikh, they are very influential when it comes to the international scene. We have seen that few of the very powerful ministers in Canada, they are Sikh, and of course they have sympathies for Khalistan, and they have spoken in past as well. And to me, I think this is the right time for the referendum, and this is the time when Sikh should be thinking about their own rights. And when it comes to Indian Punjab, of course, right now we might see that most of the people, they might not be able to talk about it, because we are living in an age where in India, if somebody tries to cheer Pakistan, being a Muslim, somebody tries to cheer Pakistan on winning a cricket match against India, it becomes a crime. And maybe Sikhs of today, they are looking at the similar things as well. So we need to keep that thing in mind as well, as Farrukh has rightly mentioned, that this is the age of Hindutva ideology in India.
Absolutely, you're right. Such a horrific and ridiculous incidents we've seen happen within India. But then again, they have been happening, and they continue to happen despite everything. My question again is, considering the fact that we already have, for example, UN Security Council resolutions in place for issues like Kashmir, and even though they are in place, the Kashmir is still struggling for so many decades. India can still take unilateral actions back in 2019, and so many years have gone by, nothing really has happened out of that. What sort of a value does a referendum hold in front of when we have resolutions in place?
Right. No, that is true. I'm assuming that you asked me this question,
yes,
right?
Farrukh.
So first of all, I don't want to downplay the importance of this referendum as an expression, right? A statement. That is very important, because Sikh community, wherever they are, have the freedom, or should have the freedom, to express themselves. If this is what they want, we should at least be supporting their right? But is it going to have any impact on overall international law framework? Remember, there is such a thing as a revision of borders. Whenever you talk about that, of course, Pakistan might have lost one wing in 1971, but that was a very complicated space because two parts of a country, in between what was there, it was India, the most hostile nation in the world, right? But when you talk about other countries in the region, hardly any country loses their land or territory that comfortably. They usually put up a fight, and India has a lot of clout at this moment, so that becomes a problem. Regarding the UN and UNSC and the international masonry of all these institutions, the problem is that we have seen these institutions also coming under a lot of crisis, right? The liberal world order for 4 years, when Donald Trump was ruling the US, it felt that it had disappeared, and all of a sudden UN did not matter at all. President Biden is trying to further has it returned to bolster it, but at this moment an institution that has gone through that kind of crisis, you cannot expect the sun and the moon from it, right? At this moment what they are trying to do is focus on climate change, which is again a big thing. But regarding something that you said earlier, and you were discussing it with Faisal, and that was about India and Indian people's response to all these things. Remember that even if you talk about the current government or the previous one, there has been something Pavlovian that has been going on in India. And that is that since the first day, the state has invested heavily in the idea of patriotism. Muslims, when they have to take oath, the Quran, where they have to put their hand, it has to be wrapped in Indian flag, right? They have been pushing people to embrace this identity so much that it has become second nature. And while that goes on, there were two incubi that they were frightened of. One, Kashmir, the other one, Khalistan. So no Indian would want to actually come forward and embrace that, especially in Narendra Modi's India, where India has changed significantly. Remember, a big chunk of Indian population is 18, 19, 20. This is the lot that was not even born on the eve of Gujarat violence. So they have no regard for that aspect. All they want is to progress and be close to the authority figures, right? And that is Hindutva. Hindutva organizations have done this meticulous job of reorganizing themselves at the grassroots level. And when you talk about Congress or other parties, although in Khalistan's story, Congress is a villain also, but they are nowhere when you talk about grassroots, right? At this moment, I don't see any autocorrect coming from India that soon. I don't see any autocorrect coming from the international community when it comes to Khalistan. But one factor that was just pointed out, Canada, other countries where Sikhs have good population, substantial population, they should be organizing themselves as watchdogs, because at this moment in Narendra Modi's bait and switch, they end up doing horrendous things. Ask people in Assam, because of their NRC, because of their CAA, what kind of hell they have gone through. Ask Kashmiris, right? They have been totally brutalized. Their identity has been crushed, and they're trying to bring about a demographic change which will pale Nazi Germany in comparison. So we have to keep a vigilant eye, because India's institutions, may be their parliament, which passes CAA over one night within hours, their Supreme Court, which doesn't touch Kashmir changes for years, right? A couple of years at least, and their media, which now is dominated by only partisan hacks, which are but ruling party partisan hacks. They are not doing their job of being good watchdogs, nor the opposition, because frankly, Congress is also a believer in soft Hindutva.
Absolutely. And let me just say, before I move on to the last question on this topic, that I'm quite happy, for the record, that I'm quite happy to see this referendum taking place. But is it safe to say, Faisal, that the Indian government has really nothing to worry about?
They have a lot to worry about. They have a lot to worry about, not even for Khalistan or Kashmir. Lots is going on in northeast of India. The Seven Sisters, especially recently we saw in Tripura, 17 mosques, and I'm not saying it, BBC reported it, 17 mosques, they were toshed and they were vandalized by Shiv Sena and Bajrang Dal type of, Hindutva type of outfits, and they have been, going against Muslims, and simply I must say that, the racism is at its peak, and this Hindutva ideology, what I see in coming future, that it is taking India towards the balkanization. Nobody else needs to do anything about it. They themselves will do it, and all we can do is we can sit back and relax and watch whatever is going on in India.
A little hard to relax, but well, we can only just sit back and watch maybe at some points. Of course, this also brings us to the last topic of the show, which is Mr. Farrukh, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to just chip in, and I wanted to add to what Faisal was saying, although I don't believe anybody has the luxury, as you said, to sit back and relax. But regarding challenges to India, I'm not someone who wants any countries break up or collapse. But frankly, Narendra Modi and his Hindutva policies are the biggest threat to India. There are three fault lines which are very important to study. One is, of course, majority-minority fault line, where Muslims are 14% and still they are brutalized. You remember, we are talking about a country of 1.3 billion people. Their 14% is not a small number, right? But this is merely talking about one fault line. The second fault line is the casteism. When you talk about caste, the current ruling elite are Brahmin. They are only 5% of total population. Who is actually dominant part of the society? It is the scheduled castes, right? And they are being disempowered continuously. He said racism. I mean, there hasn't been a country more racist than India ever. Why? Because even if you read monism and their basic scriptures, when a Shodar actually tries to marry someone, or when Gita is being read, then what happens? Their ears have to be filled with burning metal, right? So things like that. But luckily it is not entire Hinduism. It is only monism, which is one interpretation which believes in casteism. This is the second very important fault line. The third one is regional and lingual. I am not going to talk about Seven Sisters, I am going to talk about all sisters. And why am I talking about that? Because at this moment, the ruling elite, there is a state capture by the UP and Gujarat elite. And they are trying to, because they believe in Hindutva, certain version of Hindutva. India is a very heterogeneous country. They are trying to homogenize it, right? And they are trying to do it in a fashion which is not possible. So all these fault lines can erupt anytime, and then Narendra Modi's economic policies are suicidal. This is a man who one fine day, one fine morning decides that he can demonetize or do away with 84% of legal tender. If you remember that, it is a volcano that can erupt anytime.
Right, absolutely. But now let's take the debate to a lighter end of the show. Before we move on to talk about what sort of meme humor is acceptable and what's not, let's first talk about how happy we were to see the Indian side suffer humiliating defeat. It suffered defeat from Pakistan by 10 wickets and then 8 wickets from New Zealand. And although India has been our all-time favorite rivals, we do also have a sort of Cold War going on with New Zealand. So I'm not too sure sure who you guys were rooting for, but it of course is very interesting to see a team like India suffer 2 back-to-back defeats that it did. But then again, at the end of the day, of course, it's a sport, and it's good fun to enjoy it and not take it to a level where it becomes too serious, where it's becoming personal, and where a lot of the other issues that we're discussing also sort of come into play. Before we talk about that, Faisal, you watched the match, of course, and you saw the defeat that the Indian team suffered. Did it make you smile? You're smiling now.
It did.
Right.
You know, I think there are certain things that before the World Cup started, it was like India was portraying itself as they are the team, and few of their players, they were making statements like this, that we have the capacity to make 3 teams and send 3 teams, and any of the team can win World Cup. This is how they were talking on the media. Plus, when it comes to their selfishness in the game, in the cricket, they just want to highlight IPL. They just want to, and right now what they're trying to do is they're trying to push other countries to shut down their Premier Leagues, or like we have PSL. What they want to do is they want to force other players from the other countries that if somebody wants to play IPL, where obviously big money is involved, if somebody wants to play IPL, they are not allowed to play for any other team, for any other league team. So I think these are the steps which they are taking to sort of, maybe it can bring more $1 billion to BCCI, but when it comes to their cricket, we have seen what happens to their cricket. I mean, they've sent their best team, and it is proving to be the worst team of the World Cup. And I wasn't expecting this from India, but I think looking at their selfishness and looking at their bigotry,
but Faisal,
whatever's happened, excellent. Thank you very much.
What you're calling selfishness and bigotry, don't you think trash talk is sort of part of any competition? Farrukh, what do you think?
Well, and I distinctly got that impression already listening to my dear friend here. Trash talk, of course, is part of the cultural tug of war when it comes to cricketing or any sport for that matter. But usually it ends when the game ends, right? Right now, you were talking about Pakistan sort of has this Cold War in cricket with New Zealand. I don't think so. I think there was an unfortunate incident when we were planning, and I was personally planning to go and watch those matches, and it was cancelled. I understand it was unhappy memory. I want to move on. And I like New Zealand. It is a great nation. It has set examples in many ways, and in cricket also. So I don't mind rooting for them. Regarding India also, I harbor no malice, but frankly, this time I was rooting that they win so that we can do what we did earlier to them again in coming days, right? So I was slightly saddened by their defeat and the way they collapsed. Cricket is said to be by chance. There is a lot of element of chance in it as well. I like their captain, and he has been quite a serious man. Unfortunately, Hindutva trolls kept on abusing him and threatening even his one-year daughter. That was really sad, heartbreaking. My sympathies for his family, him, and everyone like Shami,
yes,
who were threatened. Cricket, South Asians somehow have become very intense. Shouldn't be this intense. This is only sport. But what made me really happy was the day we beat India, because they have been holding this thing over our heads, Mauka, that Pakistan has never been defeated. Pakistan has never defeated them in a World Cup match. So finally we did it. And it was a humongous, reprieve from mental pressure that after that we seem unstoppable. And I'm grateful that they lost. I'm grateful that our great team played really well that day.
And one very serious fact I wanted to highlight here, Sana, that is that if we look at the population of India, Dalits, they are around 23 to 24% of the population of India. And did you know that not a single Dalit is part of this cricket team, and they are the cricket lovers. They are the cricket lovers. I mean, in past we had examples, but of course, once again, I must say, we have India which is being ruled by Hindutva ideology, and that's why we are not seeing the low caste Hindus being part of this cricket team. So this could be one of the factors as well, and India must think about it.
Right, of course, the Hindutva ideology has seeped into almost everything that and every action that India has been taking. I'm sorry, Farrukh, we're a little bit out of time.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that regarding diversity debate, we can have differences, because I believe that there are many places where you showcase diversity. Sports is one place where you get the best player.
True.
Absolutely. Anything else, Mr. Farrukh? Any last comments?
Yeah, no, I'm glad at this moment the way Pakistani team is playing. What India does with its team, it's lookout. But at this moment, I want to believe that nobody who is doing their job should be put through this kind of pressure as India is doing. Let us keep on rooting for Pakistani team, and let us lift this cup, boys. It is very important.
And I would say let the meme humor keep coming in as well, because I'm really grateful for all the laughs that I get out of that. But of course, keep that within a limit. We do not want to see anything personal coming out of the humor. And of course, the fact that the country and the government in India is taking the Hindutva ideology to a level which is not acceptable, not just in terms of Kashmiris or Christians, even Sikhs and other minorities, as mentioned in the discussion, is something which the world needs to take a serious note of. Of course, the well-being of the citizens is of utmost priority to the state, and it is, of course, at the end of the day, their responsibility. Hopefully, your understanding of these issues have increased a little bit more than it was before this show started. Of course, if you want to keep doing that, you have to watch this show, The Debate, from Monday to Friday at 9:05 p.m. only on PTV World. Thank you so much for watching. That's all we have for now. Take care.